A child who counts footsteps like beads on a rosary begins to count down to death. In Milwaukee's German Quarter, the smallest voice will speak the most terrifying math. In the winter of 1873, the German immigrant community of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, whispered about 11-year-old Emma Richter in hushed, fearful tones. This pale, quiet child could calculate the day of the week for any date in human history within seconds, memorize entire conversations word for word after hearing them just once, and recite the precise number of steps between any two buildings in her neighborhood. What modern science might recognize as an extraordinary neurological condition was to the people of 1873 either a divine blessing or something far more sinister. But when Emma began using her remarkable abilities to reveal buried secrets, predict deadly accidents, and recite intimate details of crimes that supposedly no living person had witnessed, the community's amazement turned to terror. By spring, 3 men would be dead, a family would flee in the night, and Emma Richter herself would vanish without a trace, leaving behind only a leather journal filled with numbers that no one dared to decode. Before we continue with the chilling story of Emma Richter and the dark secrets her extraordinary mind uncovered in Milwaukee's German Quarter, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We bring you the most haunting historical mysteries every week. And let us know in the comments what state or city you're listening from. These stories happened in communities just like yours, closer to home than you might think. What the residents of Brewery Town didn't realize was that Emma's gift would expose a web of lies, betrayal, and murder that had been carefully hidden for nearly a decade, and that her mathematical precision would become their community's most terrifying nightmare. Milwaukee's German Quarter in 1873 was a bustling enclave of red brick breweries, modest wooden homes, and the constant sound of German voices mixing with English in the crisp Wisconsin air. The community of nearly 8,000 German immigrants had built their own little Bavaria along the shores of Lake Michigan, complete with beer gardens, traditional bakeries, and the familiar rhythms of old-world life transplanted to American soil. The men worked in the breweries, Schlitz, Best, and the dozens of smaller operations that made Milwaukee famous, while their wives tended gardens that yielded the same vegetables their grandmothers had grown in the Rhineland. Hinrich and Greta Richter had arrived from Bavaria in 1861 with dreams of prosperity and their infant daughter, Emma. Hinrich found steady work as a brewmaster at the Kellner Brewery, a mid-size operation that supplied beer to the growing city's thirsty population. Greta took in laundry and mending to supplement their income, her nimble fingers working by candlelight long after Emma had been put to bed in their small but tidy home on Galena Street. The Richters were unremarkable in every way except for their daughter. Emma had been born during the harsh Atlantic crossing, 3 weeks premature, and so small that the ship's doctor doubted she would survive the journey. But survive she did, though she remained slight and pale, with enormous gray eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with unsettling intensity. As a toddler, she rarely cried or demanded attention, content to sit quietly in corners, watching and listening as the adult world unfolded around her. By age 4, Emma's parents began to notice something unusual. She could recite entire conversations she had heard days earlier, complete with the precise inflections and accents of the speakers. She counted everything: the number of stitches in her mother's embroidery, the steps from their front door to the bakery, the exact time between the brewery whistles that marked the beginning and end of each workday. When Hinrich taught her basic arithmetic, she absorbed mathematical concepts with frightening speed, solving problems in her head faster than he could work them out on paper. The German community initially viewed Emma's abilities with a mixture of pride and unease. Old Mrs. Brennan, who claimed to remember the witch trials in her grandmother's stories, crossed herself whenever Emma's calculating gray eyes fixed on her. But Father Kuhler, the stout Bavarian priest who served their small Catholic parish, declared Emma's gifts to be a blessing from God, a child chosen to demonstrate divine wisdom in their New World community. The winter of 1872 had been particularly harsh, with temperatures dropping so low that Lake Michigan froze solid for the first time in a generation. The brewery workers huddled around coal stoves, their breath visible even indoors, while their wives struggled to keep their families warm and fed through the long, bitter months. It was during this isolated winter that Emma's abilities began to take on a darker character, though no one yet understood what was coming. Emma had developed the habit of sitting by the small window in their kitchen, watching the neighbors go about their daily routines with the same intense focus she applied to mathematical problems. She began to notice patterns, not just in numbers, but in human behavior. Mr. Kruger always walked to the brewery by the same route, taking exactly 247 steps, except on Wednesdays when he took a different path that required 284 steps. Mrs. Fisher hung her laundry in a specific sequence, but when her husband worked late at the mill, she changed the order completely. These observations might have been dismissed as the quirks of an unusual child, except that Emma began to vocalize her findings in ways that made the adults increasingly uncomfortable. The transformation from curiosity to dread began on a gray February morning in 1873. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, methodically eating her breakfast while her mother prepared her father's lunch pail, when she suddenly looked up and announced, "Mr. Dietrich will not come home from the brewery today. He will die at exactly 14 minutes past 2 o'clock." Greta nearly dropped the tin pail she was holding. "Emma, mein God, what a terrible thing to say! Why would you think such a thing?" Emma's gray eyes remained fixed on her mother's face with that unsettling intensity. "He has been drinking from the small brown bottle for 17 days. Yesterday he drank 3 times more than usual. His steps were uneven, 251 instead of 244. When people change their patterns by more than 10%, something significant happens within 72 hours. Mr. Dietrich's pattern changed by 12%. The calculation is simple." Hinrich, who had been putting on his heavy wool coat, stopped and stared at his daughter. At 2:14, a man falls, and an entire neighborhood realizes the girl at the window is not guessing. She is measuring fate. Johann Dietrich was indeed a drinker, but no more than half the men in the German quarter. The idea that Emma had been counting his steps and tracking his drinking habits was disturbing enough, but her calm, mathematical certainty about his death sent a chill through both parents that had nothing to do with the Wisconsin winter. "You must not say such things, Emma," Hinrich said firmly. "It's not proper for a child to speak of death." Emma simply nodded and returned to her breakfast, but her parents exchanged worried glances over her bent head. They had grown accustomed to their daughter's unusual observations, but this felt different, darker, and more specific than her typical mathematical pronouncements. At precisely 14 minutes past 2 that afternoon, Jan Dietrich collapsed in the brewery's malt room. The official cause of death was heart failure, brought on by what Dr. Mayer determined to be chronic alcohol poisoning. The brewery workers who found him noted that he had been acting strangely for weeks, drinking more heavily than usual, and showing signs of severe anxiety. But what truly unsettled them was the timing. Emma Richter's prediction had been accurate to the minute. Word of Emma's grim prophecy spread through the German quarter like smoke from a chimney fire. Some dismissed it as coincidence, but others remembered the pale girl with the calculating eyes and began to wonder what else she might have observed during her silent vigils at the kitchen window. The Richter family found themselves the subject of whispered conversations and sideways glances when they walked to church or visited the market. Father Kohler, who had previously praised Emma's gifts as divine, now seemed less certain. When Hinrich approached him after Sunday Mass, seeking guidance about his daughter's disturbing prediction, the priest's jovial demeanor had been replaced by something approaching concern. "Hinrich, my friend," Father Kohler said, his Bavarian accent thick with worry, "perhaps it will be best if young Emma spent less time watching the neighbors and more time with her prayers. The Lord gives us gifts, yes, but sometimes the devil can twist even the most innocent abilities toward darker purposes." This suggestion troubled Hinrich deeply. He had always been a practical man, more concerned with the science of brewing than the mysteries of faith. But even he could not dismiss the unsettling accuracy of Emma's prediction. That evening, he sat his daughter down for a serious conversation. "Emma, you must tell me the truth. How did you know about Mr. Dietrich?" Emma looked at her father with those enormous gray eyes, her expression as calm and analytical as always. "I watch, I count, I remember. Mr. Dietrich's behavior changed in predictable ways. When someone increases their alcohol consumption by 37% over a 17-day period, while simultaneously reducing their food intake by approximately 20%, cardiac stress becomes inevitable. I calculated the most probable time of failure based on his age, weight, and observed symptoms." Hinrich felt his blood run cold. His 11-year-old daughter was speaking like a physician or something far more troubling. "But Emma, how could you know all these details about Mr. Dietrich's eating and drinking?" "I observe everything, Papa. Every day, every person, every pattern." Emma's voice remained matter-of-fact, but there was something in her eyes that made Hinrich deeply uncomfortable. "Would you like me to tell you about the other calculations I've made?" Hinrich quickly shook his head. He did not want to know what else his daughter had calculated about their neighbors' lives and deaths. But as he tucked Emma into bed that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that his family was standing at the edge of something much darker than a simple mathematical curiosity. The February snow continued to fall outside their small house, muffling the sounds of the German quarter and creating an insulated world where secrets could be hidden and observations could be made without detection. Emma lay quietly in her narrow bed, her mathematical mind processing the day's data and calculating probabilities that no 11-year-old should be able to comprehend, and certainly no 11-year-old should want to know. In the weeks following Jan Dietrich's death, the atmosphere in Milwaukee's German quarter shifted like the wind off Lake Michigan. Emma continued her daily observations, but now her parents watched her with growing unease as she sat by the kitchen window, her gray eyes tracking the movements of their neighbors with mechanical precision. The child who had once been their pride had become a source of deep, knowing worry. The brewing community was tight-knit by necessity. The men relied on each other for work, their wives for companionship during the long winters, and their children played together in the narrow streets between the red brick buildings. But Emma had never quite fit into this social fabric.
"Patterns don't lie, and when a child maps your secrets in numbers, sin starts keeping time." While other children played games and told stories, she preferred to sit alone, counting and calculating and watching the world around her with that unsettling intensity. Greta began to notice that Emma's observations were becoming more detailed and more disturbing. The child would mention casually that Mrs. Weber had been meeting secretly with Mr. Kellner behind the brewery on Tuesday afternoons for 6 weeks, or that the Schneider family had been burying something in their back garden every Sunday after church. When Greta asked how Emma could possibly know such things, the girl would simply explain that she had observed the patterns and calculated the probabilities. "People think they are being secret," Emma said one March morning as she methodically buttered her bread. "But they follow patterns just like numbers. Mrs. Weber always tells her husband she's visiting her sister on Tuesday afternoons, but she takes 127 steps to Mr. Kellner's house instead of 349 steps to her sister's. The Schneiders bury objects wrapped in cloth exactly 73 centimeters apart in a grid pattern. They believe no one is watching, but I am always watching." Heinrich had heard enough. That evening, after Emma was asleep, he spoke seriously with his wife about their daughter's increasingly troubling behavior. "Greta, this cannot continue. Emma is becoming unnatural. Children should not observe such things, and they certainly should not speak of them so coldly." Greta nodded, her hands trembling as she mended one of Heinrich's work shirts. "I'm frightened, Heinrich, not of Emma, but of what people will think. Already the neighbors look at us strangely. Mrs. Brennan crossed the street yesterday when she saw me coming. And Father Kohler, he has not visited us since Jan's death." Their fears proved justified when 3 days later Emma made another of her mathematical announcements. She was helping her mother prepare dinner when she suddenly stopped peeling potatoes and looked up with that familiar calculating expression. "Mrs. Weber will be discovered tomorrow at 11 in the morning. Her husband will find her with Mr. Kellner in the brewery office. There will be violence." Greta dropped her paring knife. "Emma 9, you must not say such things." But Emma continued with the same mathematical certainty she applied to her arithmetic lessons. "Mrs. Weber has been arriving at the brewery 7 minutes earlier each week for 6 weeks. Mr. Kellner has been staying 33 minutes later each day. Tomorrow, Wilhelm Weber will return from his delivery route 47 minutes early because his horse is developing lameness in her left front leg. I have observed her gait deteriorating for 11 days. The convergence of these 3 variables makes discovery inevitable." Heinrich, who had been listening from the doorway, felt his chest tighten with dread. His daughter was not just observing their neighbors, she was predicting their futures with terrifying accuracy. "Emma, how do you know about Mr. Weber's horse?" "I count her steps when she passes our house. On March 1st, she favored her right legs 53% of the time. Today, it was 68%. Tomorrow, the lameness will be severe enough to slow the delivery route by 47 minutes, causing Mr. Weber to return early." The next day unfolded exactly as Emma had calculated. Wilhelm Weber discovered his wife Anna in a compromising position with brewery owner Ernst Kellner. The confrontation that followed left Kellner with a broken nose and 3 cracked ribs, while Anna was beaten so severely that Dr. Müller had to be summoned. The scandal rocked the tight-knit German community. But what disturbed people even more was the growing realization that little Emma Richter had somehow predicted the entire sequence of events. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood.
The fire begins not with a spark, but with a calculation. When the clock hits 8:47, Milwaukee learns what inevitability feels like. The pale girl with the mathematical mind had not only predicted Johann Dietrich's death, but had also foreseen the Weber-Kellner scandal with unsettling precision. People began to whisper about the strange child who sat at her window, watching and calculating and somehow knowing things that no child should know. The Richter family found themselves increasingly isolated. Former friends avoided them at church. Children were forbidden from playing near their house, and even the shopkeepers in the German quarter began to treat them with barely concealed suspicion. Heinrich's position at the brewery became tenuous. His fellow workers viewed him with unease, and Ernst Kellner, still recovering from his beating, made it clear that the Richter family was no longer welcome at company social events. But Emma seemed oblivious to the growing hostility around her. She continued her daily observations, her mathematical mind processing data and calculating probabilities with mechanical precision. She began keeping a leather journal, filling its pages with numbers, dates, and observations that her parents dared not read. The sight of their 11-year-old daughter bent over her calculations, writing in neat columns of figures, filled them with a dread they could not name. As winter gave way to spring, the isolation deepened. The German quarter that had once felt like home now seemed hostile and threatening. Heinrich began to consider the unthinkable, leaving Milwaukee, abandoning the life they had built, and starting over somewhere far from the whispers and the fear and the terrible accuracy of their daughter's predictions. But Emma was not finished with her calculations. The worst was yet to come, and her mathematical mind had already begun processing the data that would lead to the darkest secrets of all. As April arrived in Milwaukee, bringing with it the first tentative warmth after the brutal winter, Emma's journal grew thicker with her precise notations. The leather-bound book had become her constant companion, and she filled its pages with increasingly complex calculations that went far beyond simple mathematics. Her parents caught glimpses of charts tracking human behavior patterns, tables of numerical sequences they couldn't understand, and detailed maps of the German quarter marked with symbols and measurements. The community's fear of Emma had begun to manifest in more concrete ways. Children were forbidden from walking past the Richter house. Shopkeepers served the family quickly and without conversation, and even Father Kohler had begun limiting his interactions with them to formal church services. But Emma's isolation only seemed to sharpen her observational skills, as if the removal of normal social distractions allowed her unusual mind to focus more intently on the mathematical patterns she perceived in human behavior. Dr. Friedrich Müller, the community's physician, had grown increasingly curious about Emma's abilities. Unlike the superstitious whispers of the neighbors, Dr. Müller approached the situation with scientific interest. He had studied medicine in Berlin before immigrating to America and had encountered cases of unusual mental capabilities in his practice. When Heinrich Richter approached him privately, seeking medical advice about his daughter's condition, Dr. Müller agreed to examine Emma. The examination took place on a rainy Thursday morning in Dr. Müller's office above the pharmacy on Water Street. Emma submitted to the doctor's questions and tests with the same mathematical precision she applied to everything else, answering each inquiry with detailed accuracy while her gray eyes remained fixed on some invisible calculation. "Emma," Dr. Müller said in his accented English, "your father tells me you can predict when certain events will happen. Can you explain to me how you do this?" Emma looked at the doctor with that unsettling intensity. "I observe patterns and calculate probabilities based on established behavioral data."
7 men, 1 basement, and a ledger only a child can see. When numbers start pointing to names, predators learn the cost of being predictable. People believe their actions are random, but they follow mathematical sequences. When I have sufficient data points, I can predict future behavior with high accuracy. Dr. Müller leaned forward, intrigued despite himself.
Can you give me an example? Emma consulted her journal, flipping through pages of neat numerical notations. Mrs. Brennan believes she is keeping a secret, but her pattern is quite obvious. Every Tuesday and Friday for 8 weeks, she has walked to the church at exactly 3:15 in the afternoon. But instead of entering for prayer, she continues to the rectory and remains for precisely 43 minutes. Father Kerr's pattern has also changed. He has been purchasing extra candles and wine, and his evening prayers have extended by an average of 17 minutes on Tuesdays and Fridays. The correlation is statistically significant. Dr. Mueller felt his breath catch. The implications of what Emma was suggesting about the priest and the widow were scandalous enough, but the methodical way she had documented her observations was deeply troubling. Emma, how long have you been watching people in this way? Always, Emma replied simply. Since I was very small, but I only began making calculations when I learned mathematics. The patterns became clearer then. After the examination, Dr. Mueller spoke privately with Heinrich and Greta Richter. His medical training told him that Emma's condition was neurological rather than supernatural, but he had no framework for understanding what he had observed. Your daughter's mind works differently than other children's, he explained. She processes information in ways that seem almost mechanical. In my opinion, this is a medical condition, not the other things people are saying. But even Dr. Mueller's scientific perspective couldn't diminish the growing dread that surrounded Emma's predictions. 2 days after his examination, Emma made another of her calculated announcements. There will be a fire at the Zimmerman house on Sunday evening. It will start at 8:47 and spread to 3 adjacent buildings before the volunteer fire brigade can respond. Mr. Zimmerman will not survive. Heinrich felt the familiar chill that accompanied his daughter's predictions. Emma, you must not say such things. How could you possibly know about a fire? Emma consulted her journal. Mr. Zimmerman has been drinking lamp oil mixed with whiskey for 12 days. I observed him purchasing both items in quantities that exceed normal household use. His wife left for Chicago to visit her sister yesterday, which follows the pattern of wives leaving before significant domestic incidents occur. The chimney on their house has structural damage that I calculated based on the angle of smoke emission and the pattern of soot deposits. The probability of fire is 93%. Greta began to weep softly. The clinical way Emma discussed potential tragedy, as if human suffering were simply another mathematical problem to be solved, frightened her more than any supernatural explanation would have. This was her child, but she no longer recognized the cold precision in Emma's voice or the mechanical way she processed human pain. Heinrich decided to warn Franz Zimmermann. Too late. At 8:47, flames erupted. The blaze consumed 3 adjacent homes. Zimmermann died on his kitchen floor. The neighborhood's fear hardened into isolation, and Emma kept calculating. The revelation that would expose the darkest secret came on May 1, 1873. Emma opened her journal. For 26 months she had tracked 43 adults. 7 men met every Wednesday at midnight beneath Kellner Brewery. Movement patterns, timing inconsistencies, and spending spikes proved it. Losses, approximately $47,000. Inside help required. Patterns pointed to Ernst Kellner himself.
You can burn the evidence and bury the bodies, but you cannot outrun a mind that has already solved you. Emma warned her father. Kellner had stood outside their house at night, 17 minutes, twice, testing whether the child had seen too much. Probability of action against the family, 84%. Peak likelihood within 72 hours. That evening, Heinrich took Emma's ledger to Dr. Mueller. The physician read by lamplight and turned pale. He arranged an emergency position for Heinrich at a Minnesota brewery. They would leave before the clock on Emma's prediction struck. As the family climbed into the wagon under cover of darkness, Emma whispered one last calculation. Within 6 months, federal investigators would uncover the theft ring, Kellner would be convicted, 3 accomplices would not survive the investigation. By winter, every number proved true. Kellner was arrested and convicted of embezzling over $50,000 across brewery operations. Wilhelm Weber was found dead, ruled a suicide. Otto Steinberg died in a supposed accident. Hermann Kruger's sudden heart attack looked, to Dr. Mueller, like poison. The German quarter rebuilt, chastened and quieter. Emma's ledger left with Dr. Mueller unsettled federal agents. Beyond the conspiracy, it mapped the behavior of dozens of families, predicting outcomes with unnerving accuracy. Your daughter's mind works in ways professional investigators might envy, an agent admitted, but I'm grateful she is far from Milwaukee. A final mention appears in New Ulm College records, 1875. Professor Herman Weiss praised an unnamed special student with unprecedented skill in statistical analysis and behavioral prediction. Soon after, the family relocated again. Then, silence. Emma vanished from history as completely as she disappeared from Milwaukee that night in May of 1873. Some say families with unusual children choose anonymity, fleeing both exploitation and persecution. What remains is a ledger and a lesson. The mind can be a lantern or a blade. In 1873, people called Emma divine or demonic. Today, science might call it a form of savant ability or atypical neuroprocessing, still terrifying when aimed relentlessly at human secrets. What do you believe? Was everything revealed? Or did Emma see patterns she never dared to write? If this tale chills you, share it, and remember, the patterns you think you hide may already be numbered, totaled, and waiting in someone's quiet, merciless arithmetic.